What if the part of the Bible you were taught to respect most, the part your tradition built its identity around, the part that felt like the bedrock under everything, was never meant to last? Not failed, not wrong, just finished. Paul writes one sentence in Galatians chapter 3 that should have ended 2,000 years of arguments. It did not. But the sentence is still there, and I want to sit with what it actually meant to the people who first heard it. So Galatians. If you have not spent time in this letter recently, it is worth knowing that Paul is not in a reflective mood when he writes it. He is furious. He skips his normal pleasantries, skips the Thanksgiving section he opens almost every other letter with, and goes straight to, "What are you doing?" These are churches he planted, Gentile converts, people who came to faith through his preaching. And after he left, a group of Jewish Christian teachers showed up and told them, essentially, your faith in Jesus is real, but it is not enough. You need Torah, circumcision, dietary laws, the whole system. And Paul calls that a different gospel. He says anyone preaching it, including himself, including an angel, is cursed. By chapter 3, he has built a careful legal case. Abraham was justified by faith centuries before the law existed. The law came later, 430 years later, and a later addition cannot override a prior covenant. Then he asks the question everyone in Galatia would have been thinking: if the promise to Abraham was enough, what was the law for? And his answer is verse 24. The law was our paidagōgos. Now, most English Bibles translate that word as tutor or guardian or schoolmaster. And every one of those translations misses something that Paul's audience would have caught instantly. A paidagōgos was not a teacher. The word comes from pais, child, and agogos, leader, literally, child leader. But in the Greco-Roman world, a paidagōgos was a household slave. Usually older, sometimes a war captive. His job was to walk the child to school, keep him out of trouble, enforce the household rules, administer discipline when needed. He had real authority, including corporal punishment. But that authority was entirely borrowed from the father. It was not his, and it had an expiration date. When the child reached maturity, around 14 to 16, marked in Roman culture by the toga virilis ceremony, the paidagōgos was dismissed. Not honored, not promoted, dismissed. His job was done because the child was no longer a child. And notice what the paidagōgos was not. He was not the didaskalos, the teacher. He was not shaping the child's mind or forming the child's character. He was keeping the child in line, escorting, supervising, restraining. Paul had other Greek words available if he wanted to say the law educated Israel or mentored Israel toward maturity. He did not use any of them. He picked the word for the slave who walks you to school and makes sure you do not wander off on the way. And when you see that, when you see what Paul chose and what he did not choose, the whole passage tilts. If the law was a teacher, then Christ is graduation. You completed the course. The law and the gospel are continuous. Same project, different levels. But if the law was a custodian slave, then Christ is emancipation. The child has come of age. The custodial arrangement and the life of the heir are structurally different things. One is custody. The other is freedom. Paul's entire argument in Galatians requires the second reading. There is a structural detail underneath this that the English completely flattens. In verse 24, the phrase "eyes Christon," unto Christ, has been debated for centuries. Does eyes mean toward Christ, as in the law's content was pointing us to Jesus? Or does eyes mean until Christ, as in the law's custody lasted until Jesus arrived? And the answer matters enormously. Because the first reading, toward, makes the law feel like a runway, a positive preparation. The law was always leading somewhere good. But the second reading, until, makes the law feel like a holding pattern, a confinement measure whose entire justification was the heir's immaturity. And the context settles it. Go back 5 verses. Chapter 3, verse 19. The law was added until the offspring should come. Verse 23, we were held captive until the coming faith would be revealed. The whole argument is built on temporal markers. Before, until, when. The architecture of the paragraph is a timeline, not a curriculum. The custodian served until the heir grew up. That is it. The law was not a runway. It was a waiting room. And then there is the adverb in verse 25, ouketi. No longer. Such a small word, but it is doing all the theological work. Ouketi presupposes a previous state that has now ceased. We were under a custodian. We are no longer under a custodian. Not somewhat less. Not mostly not. No longer. The era has closed. Paul's grammar does not leave a door open for re-entry. You cannot re-enroll in a dispensation that has ended. And one more layer. When Paul says faith has come in verse 25, Elthouse's tes pistos, he uses the article, the faith. Not when you personally start believing, but when the faith arrived. The genitive absolute construction treats faith's arrival as a historical event, a singular shift in epochs, like a bell ending a shift. The custodian does not get phased out gradually. He is relieved of duty because the era changed. And that means no individual believer gets to choose whether they are under the custodian or not. The Father made the call. The arrangement is over. That was a Wednesday, the week I had been living inside this passage, when I realized why it still has teeth. Because the Galatian crisis sounds ancient until you recognize it in your own chest. The Judaizer's pitch was simple and compelling. Faith is good, but it is not the whole thing. You need to add something to be complete. And that pitch did not die in the first century. Think about the stretch between Ash Wednesday and Easter, that long liturgical season where a lot of traditions ramp up the disciplines, fasting, extra services, devotional reading plans, giving something up. And there is nothing wrong with any of that. But somewhere around week 3, if you are honest, something shifts. The discipline stops feeling like a response to grace and starts feeling like the basis of it. You are not fasting because you are free. You are fasting because you are afraid of what it means if you stop. You are keeping score. And the score is the thing between you and God, not Christ. The score. That is the custodian. You have rehired him. Not because someone forced you, but because the unstructured openness of faith felt too thin, too quiet, like something was missing. Or think about it from a completely different angle. Someone I watched go through this. A guy who'd been in church leadership for years, solid, well-read, the kind of person other people brought their questions to. And over the course of about 18 months, his marriage fell apart. Slowly. Not one catastrophic thing, just the slow leak. And as it was happening, the first thing that collapsed was not his faith. It was his confidence that his faith was enough. Because he would been good. He would done the reading, led the groups, showed up early, stayed late. And now the thing he would built was cracking, and the voice in his head was not grace. It was inventory. What did I miss? What did I fail to do? Where is the line item I dropped that caused this? That voice, that relentless internal audit, is the paidagōgos. It is the custodian who is dismissed, still pacing the hallway, still checking the clipboard. And the thing that makes it so hard to release is that the custodian sounds responsible. He sounds like wisdom. He sounds like the part of you that takes faith seriously. But Paul's word for what the custodian does is not wisdom. It is custody, confinement. The Greek in verse 23, phroumetha synkaklismenoi, means held under guard, locked in together. The law was not gently guiding Israel toward maturity. It was a locked room. And maybe the hardest version of this is the one that does not come from inside your own head, but from a community you love. Every tradition has its version of the Judaizer's pitch. Faith in Christ is the entry point, yes. But the real markers of belonging are something else. Theological precision, political alignment, the right schooling choices for your kids, the right posture on the right controversies at the right time. And you know the test. Could you drop the addition, keep your faith in Christ but release the extra thing, and still have a seat at the table? If the answer is no, you are in a community that has rehired the custodian over people Paul says have been emancipated. None of those additions are evil. That is what makes this so hard. Torah observance was not evil. It was given by God, mediated through angels, ratified with blood. and Paul still calls it a household slave assigned to watch children. Not because it was bad, because it was finished. The thing Paul offers the Galatians is not comfort. He does not say, "Do not worry, grace covers the gap." He says something more unsettling and more disorienting. He says, "You are not incomplete people who need to add something. You are mature heirs whose father has dismissed the custodian because the custodian's job is done." And the proof is verse 26, the verse that follows immediately, connected by gar, for. For in Christ Jesus you are all sons of God through faith. The sonship is not a nice bonus. It is the reason the custodial arrangement ends. You are not under a paidagōgos because you are not a child anymore. But Paul does not say what replaces the structure. Not yet. Not in these verses. He will get to the Spirit in chapter 5. He will talk about the fruit that grows when the custodian steps away and something living takes his place. But right here, in verses 24 and 25, he just says, the custodian is dismissed. And that means there is a gap. A moment of standing in the open air without the escort, without the clipboard, without the locked room. And that silence where the rules used to be is not a sign that something is missing. It is the sound of the door opening. Who dismissed yours?